Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this Jetbrains Open Day. How many of you came here from like 2 p.m.? Okay. In case you didn't see, this presentation is in English. Just want to make sure. I hope that you've enjoyed the office. I hope that you've enjoyed the food. Have you? Good. Oh, you can speak as well. Excellent. That's awesome. So I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into, so we've shown you the awesome stuff, right? You've seen the awesome food, you've seen the awesome office. Now I'm going to show you the horrible, no, I'm joking. Now I'm going to show you a little bit about how Jetbrains works inside and what kind of things that you need to have to be part of this company, so to speak. To give you a little bit of background, Jetbrains was started about in the year 2000. That's many years ago, 19. It was started by 3 people that they were working with Java and they were struggling with renaming stuff. So they made this plugin called Renamer. And that plugin got converted into an IDE called IntelliJ. And now we've got many, many products. And it was growing. I mean, when I joined Jetbrains, I think we're about 140 people, which was 10 years ago. Now we're about 1,200. So that video that you just saw about 750 beating hearts, it's not like half of us don't have a heart. It's just that we didn't update the video. So now, if you look at any company, you've got your typical barriers. And the reason that I call this removing barriers is because I want to kind of break down the consequences of removing some of these barriers and how you can work and what the challenges are with those. But if you look at any kind of organization, you've got your organizational hierarchies, you've got your working hours, you have your communication challenges, and you have your communication channels, which are defining exactly how people should communicate and with who should they communicate, etc. And you have generally strict areas of responsibility. So if we take a look at Jetbrains, we're really not a traditional hierarchy. If we look at the teams, we have basically we have team members, then we have team leads, and then you would have what you would call the management. And that more or less is true, but there are some places where we've managed to kind of bring in a couple more layers. But generally, that is still the case. And I'll explain why some of those layers may be needed at times. But more than the hierarchy and like how many levels of hierarchy we have, I think the important aspect here is that really at Jetbrains, it doesn't matter who you are, what your title is, it really is irrelevant. You are encouraged to express your thoughts. You're encouraged to participate in any discussion. It doesn't matter what you are. You can talk to anyone. You can disagree with the CEO. You can disagree with the CFO. You can disagree with anyone, and it's absolutely fine. No one is against it. If we take a look at our rules and regulations at Jetbrains, well, in essence, you can sum it up in work whenever you want, work on what you want, and get stuff done. I mean, that's generally it, right? So it's paradise, yes? Okay, thank you very much. Now you can go and party. No, it's not. I mean, if it was, then this talk would be a little bit, over. It's not quite paradise. And what I want to do is try and, talk about some of the things that work and some of the things that don't, and what you have to do to try and adapt to this kind of lifestyle or work environment, so to speak. But let's start with something very, very simple, which is breaking down the hours, right? So, the rules of engagement at Jetbrains are essentially be there for meetings, even if it may mean that you have to be remote because you can't make it to the office. And in Bavaria, where we have our second largest office, it's in Germany, and if there's one thing that we know about Germans is beer and rules, right? They love rules. So in Germany, in Bavaria, you're not allowed to go to work on Sundays or public holidays. Like legally, you're not allowed to go. Like the office is locked. Apart from that, you can essentially come to work anytime you want. In fact, when I joined Jetbrains 10 years ago, St. Petersburg, people would come in at 11:30, 12, 10, 10:30, 11:30, 12, they would come into work. That recently drastically changed. People now come in at around 9, 9:15, sometimes 8:30. You know why? They serve breakfast. I kid you not. That's the main reason people come in earlier. So what are the benefits of this? Well, your kid is sick. It's okay. You don't need to give some explanation that your kid is sick and I can't come to work. I can stay with them. If you need to do paperwork, and if you move to Germany, trust me, there's a lot of paperwork to do. If you know you can't work for whatever reason for one day, all of us suffer some problems at home. We may have some issues. We may be demotivated that day, whatever. No one is going to chase you and say, why didn't you come to work today? It's very much kind of like a trust environment, which we talk about. Does it work? Generally, yes. There really isn't any kind of problem when it comes to keeping these hours whenever you want, right? I mean, we've won, I think, a few times some of the best support in a company that provides best support, and Sergey Baranov comes to work sometimes at like 4 in the afternoon and goes home at like 4 in the morning, right? So it really doesn't matter. One of the things that I mentioned is meetings. And so how do we cope with meetings at JetBrains? You've probably gone through the offices, right? And you've seen that there's a lot of meeting rooms, right? Like every other room is a meeting room. It might scare you that there's a lot of meetings. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to comment. I don't walk around the office much. But all we know is, like, these are blog posts that you've all read about, right? Before even I asked that, how many of you actually enjoy meetings here? Okay. 3 or 4 people. That's absolutely fine. We're not going to judge you. It's okay. I like meetings too. But, if you look at any kind of website, you go to Hacker News, you go to, Hubberoo? Yeah? You got all of these blog posts like boring meetings should die, 9 reasons meetings suck, that they suck out the energy and your life from you, and they just leave you drilled up in the corner, dying, and meetings are the horrible thing. It is absolutely true that bad meetings suck. So some of the things that we've tried to adopt and some changes that we've made is we make it very clear what the meeting purpose is. And you've got to establish kind of what is that meeting purpose. Is it a coordination, or is it about status updates? So when it comes to coordination, it's pretty simple. It's like, let's focus on a single topic. And for those of you that are developers, you've probably heard of the single responsibility principle, right? Which is like break down a class into a single responsibility. This is kind of the same thing. You're not going to have a meeting that says, okay, we're going to reinvent the world. Let's have a meeting about that. No, we try and break it down into smaller topics and try and walk away with action items. And this is one exercise that I personally do, is when I want to call a meeting, I say, what is the action item that I want people to walk away with? And often if I can't come up with that action item, then I just don't have the meeting. I may convert that into an email or something else. And this is something that it feels like it really is helping us for those of us that are calling these kind of meetings. Now, what about stand-ups? Now, before I show you the next slide, I want to say, how many of you know what a stand-up is or participate in a stand-up? Okay. How many of you like it? Okay. A few more people than like meetings. So this is a controversial topic. The other day I decided to ask Twitter. And this is very valid data because I've got 823 votes, okay? It's fine. That's a good number. That's statistically the best number you need to prove a point, because I said so. So if you take a look at this, I asked people that do daily stand-ups, what is their thoughts of it? 33% they're extremely valuable, 42% they're good idea, bad implementation, and a lot of them are a waste of time, right? So it seems like at some point the whole idea of Agile and the stand-up things didn't happen. Now, I want to talk about a very big, I'm going to say a big disclaimer here. A lot of teams at JetBrains do stand-ups. Some of us no longer do. We've moved to other things. But what I think is important to understand about stand-ups is what exactly they're about, right? What is the main purpose of a stand-up? Is it about sharing updates? Now, we've all done it. And I'm pretty sure that all of us here at times, maybe not always, but many times we're sitting in a stand-up, remember, sitting down in a stand-up, and we're just waiting for our turn and otherwise phased out, right? Now, we've worked very hard to avoid that. We play like ping pong. We're like, okay, you're not going to go in turn. We're going to alternate, and you pick the next person to avoid that scenario. But if it gets to a point where you're like just sharing things and it becomes routine and people aren't really paying attention, it's to question the purpose. Is it about trust? This is something that is always sold to you in terms of stand-up, especially with the Agile coaches. It's like you go in front of your team and you make a commitment that you're working on something. Yes? And then tomorrow you're going to work on something else. And you go and you stand in front of your team and you're like, I'm working on bug feature X. And then tomorrow you go, I'm working on bug feature X. And the next day, I'm still working on bug feature X. And everyone's going to say, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, why are you working for 3 days on bug feature X? And you're not giving any more insight. You're not telling them why. And now they're starting to maybe judge you and say, what's the problem with this person? Right? So, what is this idea of, no, I'm going to commit to people? Now, some people say, oh, it's about communication. And I love this. It's like stand-ups kind of encourage communication. Yes, because the best way to encourage communication is to gather everyone in a formal setting and let them speak for 1 minute. That's the best way to encourage communication. And some people actually limit it to this. Like, do you communicate? Yes, we do, during the stand-up. So some things that we've adopted, like alternatives to stand-ups, we use tracking tools. Like, for example, my team personally, we use Confluence. Are you familiar with Confluence? Yes? So otherwise known as the black hole at times. Because yeah. Anyway, we use tracking tools, and then what we do is we use another tool which is called Slack, and then we basically write things on Slack, and it goes to Confluence, and then everyone can see what everyone's doing, and we encourage everyone to actually look at that once a week for the purpose of raising awareness, because that, again, is an issue which we'll get to. Now, another problem is in terms of communication, and what are the communication channels and the flow that goes on in JetBrains. This is extremely, extremely accurate. As the number of people grow in a company, the communication issues become bigger and bigger. It's like spot on, exactly to the numbers. So what are the challenges of growth? Well, first of all, it's like the who's who. I mean, I don't come frequently to the office, but when I come, I don't know anyone. I literally do not know anyone. Every time I come, there's like 100 new people, and you don't know who's who. But then you question, like, is it really important? Does it really matter that I don't know everyone in the office? Well, generally not really. You know, it's okay to know that there are people working on things or whatever. You don't need to know every individual person. But the problem does arise when we're talking about who does what. And this is a bigger issue in JetBrains in that, you know, and I'll speak about this, that we give people a lot of freedom. And in JetBrains, apart from the fact that you have the 20% project, 20% time, like that 20% of your time you can dedicate to doing something else, that something else can be anything at all. Like, we have had people that spend 20% of their time that are developers doing HR, that are marketing, doing development. They do anything. And a lot of these projects start to come out, and then you end up in a situation where are two people actually working on the same thing, and are they not even aligned? And this happens over and over again, right? We end up in situations where, because people often have this freedom to do whatever they want, we end up with someone on, and now I can even say, in Tower East working on something, and Tower West is working on the exact same thing, and they don't know about each other. And, you know, it's like, why duplicate efforts? Why try and do this? So we try and encourage ways to surface what's happening so that this doesn't occur. And for that, we try and create a few communication channels. But when you're creating communication channels, apart from trying to encourage everyone to constantly talk to each other, right? That's the whole idea of the coffee stands is not to give you coffee. It's to kind of get people to talk to each other. That's the reason for it. You say to yourself, like, do you push or do you pull? Because one of the problems is that if you have too much information, then you have this problem of signal versus noise, right? You end up with, I'm pushing too much, people are going to ignore it. There's a lot of developers here, right? Yes or no? My questions are very simple. It's yes or no. Da, niet. Okay? So how many of you receive notifications from bugs that you have to fix? Quite a few of you. How many of you have a label in Gmail that reroutes it to somewhere, and then once it reaches 1,000, you say mark as read? Exactly. Because once you start to push too much things to people, they can't take so much information. So we've got to find this balance between push and pull. But the problem is that even if you pull, like push is I push you stuff, pull is I put a whole bunch of stuff somewhere, let's call it Confluence, call it whatever you want, and I trust that you will look at that. There are times, I kid you not, that I have put things on Confluence, and then 3 years later, I have started to write the same things and put it on Confluence because I forgot that I did that 3 years ago. It happens. It happens. Because it becomes so much information that it becomes somewhat difficult. So we try and use some tools at JetBrains. You know, email. Email is something that we try and keep to a minimum because nobody really loves email, right? Nobody does. A few people? No. Generally, we don't like email. And a few years ago, I was one of the big advocates to adopt this tool. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Slack. Anyone? Yes. And Slack was really cool. I was like, people are like, where is, you know, what are you doing? Where did you say this? On Slack. What's Slack? Sign up. And it was awesome. And Slack had one big promise. it said, we will reduce your email. And they did. They delivered on that promise. At the same time, they also delivered 6,580 notifications on a daily basis, but they did reduce email, right? And that is actually another problem. Like, people are overwhelmed with the amount of notifications you can get on Slack. So for example, one thing that I've adopted is when I started to come on Slack, I would ping everyone everywhere. Like, hey, do you have a second? Before it was like, hey, and then you would wait for them to reply. It's like, yes. Do you have a second? Yes. Can you sum those three in one question, please? Okay. But it gave me this sense of like, I can ping anyone anytime I want and interrupt what they're doing. And that actually becomes an issue, right? And about a year ago, 6 months ago, I started to realize that is not really good, because I am interrupting people with things that may not be urgent. Sometimes I'm like, hey, when you have a minute, it's not urgent, get back to me, right? And then they wouldn't respond to me, and I'm like, what, are they pissed off at me or something? No, because I said it's not urgent. And I've had that sometimes happen to me as well. Like, say someone sends me a Slack message, and I don't respond, and then about an hour later, I get an email saying, did you see my Slack message? I'm like, yes, it's not urgent, but never mind. So now we get email and Slack. It's great. But you can route your email to your Slack, or your Slack to your email, which is even better. One other thing that we're trying to do, what we've done very, very heavily in Jetbrains, is that we use an issue tracker. It's called UTrack. You could use whatever you want. Obviously, if you join Jetbrains, you're going to be using UTrack. And we use UTrack for absolutely everything inside Jetbrains, whether it's payment requests, whether it's invoicing, whether it's trips, whether it's bugs, features, decision-making, going to conferences, everything. And some of the benefits that this provides is, apart from the aspect that it gives you workflows, et cetera, it allows people to actually come on and off discussions all of the time. So if I'm interested in a discussion, I could just watch that discussion. When I'm tired of it, I can unwatch. When I need to join a discussion, I can join at any moment in time and not worry that someone's included me in the wrong segment of the email thread, that I've missed 30 messages. And this also gives us statuses, so we can say if something is to be discussed, if something is open, if something is closed, etc. So it works very, very well for us. One other thing that we try and do is this thing called the internal newsletter, which essentially is a summary, because many of us work in different fields, in different communities, etc. It's kind of like a summary of, it started actually as a summary of what's going on in the industry that you could be aware of. And then we added other things like financial information, like keeping people up to date on how products are doing, how sales are doing, etc. Then we started to add company news, and then we started to add like internal research news and stuff. And generally, the feedback on it is that it's good, continue, and it seems to be nicely received from people. We also, probably like many other companies, have an internal conference. And when we started this, we're like, well, 50, 60% of JetBrains is technical, so let's make the technical conference. And then we realized that majority of people didn't want technical content. They wanted non-technical content. They wanted to see like other aspects of the company, of like how things are going, what new projects are going on, etc. So we started to shift towards that, and then we said, well, to make up for it, we'll create this thing called Technical Wednesdays, where people that want to just talk about random things, they can come and talk on Wednesdays. And this was really funny, because we created this thing called Technical Wednesdays, and then people from marketing or sales or whatever, they would come to me and say, hey, do you think this, like, I want to give a presentation, when can I do it? And I'm like, you can do it during Technical Wednesdays. They're like, but my talk isn't technical. I'm like, it's okay, you can still do it at Technical Wednesdays. They're like, but it's called Technical Wednesdays. I'm like, but it's not technical. So now we just call it Wednesdays, okay? Now, another thing that we're talking about is regarding management, right? Or lack of it. You've all seen this, right? You've all seen this slide of this tweet, right? So do we have management or no management at JetBrains? So we don't have micromanagement. Like when you join JetBrains, it's not, here's your to-do list, and I'm going to follow it one by one. There is none of that. We don't have micro-reporting because there's no micromanagement. There's no permission required. You generally don't come and say, can I do this? You generally do it. And there's a saying that says, I'd rather someone say sorry for screwing up than never ever saying sorry because they've never ever tried to do anything. And given that people can do 20% projects, Sometimes you don't even have to ask for permission for anything. So what do? We try and set objectives, like set a series of goals. Like I run the developer advocacy team. What is our goals in developer advocacy? It is to make users, you, developers, more efficient at what they're doing. And part of that is using our tools, because we strongly believe that our tools make you more efficient. That is our goal. And then how we accomplish it depends on the person, depends on the product, depends on the stage of the product. These things are then defined by the individuals or smaller teams inside the bigger team. We try and provide guidance, and we remove obstacles. That's generally the idea that we have here. But we also care for people, give them freedom, and trust them. Now, I've put these words in bold because they're important, right? Okay? And I'll explain them, but that's why they're in bold, because bold means important. So caring is very easy to say. Have you ever met a manager or a team lead and you've asked them, do you care for the people you manage? And they're like, hell no. Like, I wish they would just go. No. Generally, people say, oh yes, of course I care for them. I care for them dearly. They're wonderful, and they're wonderful people, and I care for them. The problem is that a lot of companies, a lot of people, and a lot of teams and managers, etc., try and say that there needs to be a separation between professional and personal. That I don't need to establish a personal relationship with anyone. It's all professional. And that is completely wrong, because if you do not establish a personal relationship with someone, how the hell or why the hell are you going to care for them? And caring for them isn't providing cookies and pizzas and free lunch. Caring for them is caring for them on a personal level. So it's very easy to say, oh yeah, I care for people, but then do you actually follow up with it? Are you actually caring for their individuality, for the problems that they may be having? These are important aspects. And we talk about freedom, we say give people freedom, but this is another problem at times, because freedom comes at a cost. So I'll give you a case study. So let's say that, work on what you want and have fun and work whenever you want. So here's one that, let's say that I'm working on a bug or a feature, and I'm working on a product, and someone makes a feature request, and I'm like, oh, that looks really, really interesting. Like, it's the new shiny, it's amazing, right? And I question, does it add value? Yes, because I'm going to implement this feature, and it's going to, my customers are going to love it, and it's great. So it's cool. Do I enjoy it? Absolutely, because it's the new shiny, right? I want to work on this feature. It's awesome. But then do I look at it in the larger context, right? Maybe I have a bug that's outstanding for 2 years, right? And I say, okay, if I fix that bug, will it be better than if I just work on this new feature? And do I take into account whether me working on this feature and not working on that bug might potentially delay other things? And these are sometimes things that we do not really understand, right? Because we all know, like, what is the saying in Russian? It's "Abeshinova trigoda jtut" or something like that. If you're waiting 2 years to fix it, you might as well wait 3 years to fix it. But this is something that is very important to take into account. And at times, it's not that obvious. We also have kind of like this thing that we need to take into account because of the way that we actually do product management. Like, we generally don't have the general product management that you have in many companies. There isn't a single person in many teams that decides, this is what's going to go into the product this version. It's individuals working on the product that say, okay, well, I've got this feature done, I'm going to ship it for this version, etc., etc. And this is a problem as well, because you need to kind of take into account your surroundings, your awareness. It's not just about you, it's about the bigger picture. So these are things that you need to always be aware of. So what is needed? You need to have self-organization, because you need to organize your own to-do list. You need to organize what you're doing. No one's going to come and say, this is the list of things I want you to work on at JetBrains. You need to have discipline, because it's really great to create a to-do list, but then say, oh, look, new shiny, and forget that to-do list. And it's very, very hard to cope with this when you do not have external pressure, when you do not have external due dates. Take us, for example, developer advocates, right? We go and speak at conferences, we create content, etc., etc. The only external due date that is sometimes imposed by us is either a release or speak in a conference. Some of the other stuff we could potentially delay eternally, and sometimes we do, but it's not a good thing. And it's very hard to have that discipline. Responsible. Right? Because you need to be responsible not about only yourself, but about what your actions are going to do towards others. And work on your communication, which is, for many of us, can be a struggle at times. But you also need to know how to prioritize. You need to know how to prioritize in the smaller picture. You need to know how to prioritize in the bigger picture. You need to know how to control your passions. Like when someone says, oh, how do you hire good people? We hire passionate people. Yes, because it's great to have passionate people. The problem is when passion goes too far. Sometimes passion blinds you. Sometimes passion says, I'm driving this way and I'm not going to look because I'm so passionate about this. And, there's a sign that says you're going to fall off the cliff and there's no barrier, nothing, but I'm just going to go because I'm passionate. It's important to learn to know how to control your passions. And as I said, because I'm going to keep communicating this, communication is really, really important. But the biggest thing is always question whether what you're doing brings value. And this is extremely hard in a company that's not driven by KPIs, right? Because if someone, you go to some large companies and they're like, okay, you're in sales, right? You need to hit $250,000 this quarter. Like, okay, I hit it, I'm done. Right? Done, that's it. But we all know what happens often with KPIs is that we just try and game the system, right? Oh, I made $600,000 this quarter, but I won't close this deal because I need another $250,000 in the next quarter, and that's it. So you don't have that. You have objectives. How do you know if you've reached your objectives? It's not that easy, and that's where you often need to have better feedback, because it's not always easy for you to know if what you're doing can bring value or not. So it's very, very important to try and get feedback. And we try here. We could do better, absolutely, but we try. But some of the things that we always think about when we talk about feedback is this hierarchy. Like there's boss, the not the boss, and not the boss, and that's how the feedback goes, right? The boss has to give me feedback. And you sit there and you're like, I'm really pissed off because the boss doesn't give me feedback. But feedback is two ways. When was the last time you gave feedback to the boss? This often we don't think about this. And you're like, oh, I can't possibly give feedback to my boss. Yes, you can. If you start with caring, if you start with a personal relationship, then you absolutely can. You have that freedom and ability to talk to people. Because feedback isn't just top down. And it's not just bottom up. Feedback is also side to side, right? It's at your peers. And this is something that we need to work on, and we always have to encourage people to give feedback. It's if someone does something that is maybe on your team or not on your team, it is still important to give them feedback. And generally, what is good, what we encourage, what we try and do is, keep your positive feedback public, praise publicly. Give constructive feedback in private. Not the other way around, because then it doesn't work. But it's also important to reinforce that positivity. And if you look at different cultures, there's the culture of everything is awesome and everything is wonderful and everything you do is a pat on the back. And then there's the culture of, yes, but even so, right? And I'm not going to say where that culture is, but generally in some of the Eastern countries, I'm not going to mention any such as Russia, but you do something awesome, they're like, yeah, but still, there is that problem. And you need to find that balance in the middle of not being overly, oh, this is fake, but not saying it's, you need to try and give people positive feedback. And when we talk about freedom, we talk about care, we talk about trust, this is all a two-way street. So if I'm giving you all of this, I need to receive all of this. If not, then that generally doesn't work. So if there's no management, is there leadership? Well, leadership is a completely overloaded term, which, there is the philosophy that I actually subscribe to, which is everyone is a leader. Anyone that can lead, anyone that can innovate, anyone that can inspire, anyone that can encourage people, they are leading them. They are leading them to do something better. So let's forget leadership and let's call it bananas. What is bananas? It's about not being a bottleneck. And this is something that you need to learn. It's about understanding that it's not great that you're the person that's in control of everything. You need to let go that people don't constantly come to you and ask you for permission. It's about learning to delegate. And learning to delegate is really easy. Yes, I'm a team lead. I'm going to hire 6 people to do the other job, and I just sit back and, on my little thingy and drink my pina colada. The problem with delegation isn't saying, I'm going to hire people to do the work. It's how you then treat the results of that work, how you look at it, how you criticize it. Are you always criticizing it in your own eyes, like, oh, I could have done this much better myself? These are things that you need to kind of learn to adapt with. It's also very much about seeing the bigger picture. Again, when we talk about when you're working on some things about the responsibilities, it's about understanding the bigger picture. It's about that when I was talking about sometimes we have to introduce an additional layer, is because if too many people are doing too many things that may need to be coordinated, they may not see it between themselves. So there needs to be someone that is seeing all of this. It's knowing how to listen and be heard. Now, many of us have spouses, we have partners, we have whatever you want, we have colleagues, and we enter these discussions, and we don't agree with them, and all we're doing is we're waiting. I've said, I think it's like this, and they're saying, well, I think it's like this, and they're trying to give you an explanation, and you're just like, can you just shut up because I disagree with you, right? You're just waiting for them to shut up so that you say, no, you're wrong, again. And then what happens is that you stop listening. You stop actually listening to what they're saying. You're just waiting for them to shut up so that you can just say again, I disagree. This is very, very important. And I do this all the time, even with my wife at home, right? Like sometimes when we enter a heated discussion, I consciously click and say, Hadi, just listen before just disagreeing. It's a very good practice to do. I'm not saying it's good practice to argue. I'm saying when you are arguing to kind of hold back. Provide guidance and challenges. And guidance is essentially feedback. It's about the positive feedback and it's about the constructive feedback. But it's also about challenges, because a lot of times what we do is when let's say that we're working with a team or we're the team lead or whatever, we focus a lot on the ones that are giving us issues. We focus the ones that are having problems that we want to improve them. And we forget about the people that are doing really well. We don't try and look at them and try and offer them more challenges. And this is something that's very, very important, especially in a company like Jetbrains, where, in many companies, some people like to climb what's called the corporate ladder, right? I start here and then I climb the corporate ladder. At Jetbrains, there really isn't a corporate ladder. It's like it's this high, right? So our growth isn't how high you can get, it's how much you can expand your knowledge, how much you can challenge yourself, how much you can go from developer to HR, from HR to developer, from marketing to whatever. This is the focus where the growth is, about bringing new challenges to what you're doing. And it's about, very importantly, being candid. It's about understanding that it is important to tell people the truth. It is important to tell them if they're making a mistake so that they learn from it. Hiding this criticism is going to hurt you, it's going to hurt the team, it's going to hurt the company, and ultimately it's going to hurt that person as well, because they're going to go through life being lied to. So, this is kind of like the way we work, and how do we try and keep the culture? And, when you talk about companies, they always talk about, oh, it's really, really important to keep the culture. This is a picture every year. We do a Christmas party where we take all of the people at Jetbrains, every single person at Jetbrains, and their families to a location and have a party. This was the last time we did it all as a company in a single location, which was in Helsinki. Now it's just too big. You can't ship 6,000 people to a single place. Well, you can, but no one. Anyway, so we kind of St. Petersburg office, the Russia office does its thing, the Munich, Germany office, the Prague office do their thing. But it's like, what do you do with the culture, right? Well, first of all, you have to start to understand different cultures. I mean, your Jetbrains was created by 3 people that were living in the Czech Republic that were Russians, right? There's a lot of Russian people at Jetbrains, but there's a lot of Czech people, there's a lot of American people, there's a lot of English, Spanish. I don't know what I am because I was born in Iran and now I'm Spanish, so somewhere in the middle there. There's a lot of different cultures in Jetbrains. And this is something that you need to adapt to in many, many ways, and you need to change. So it's important to keep the culture, but it's important to change. To give you a very simple example, I'm sure that you've heard this. I'm sure that many of you have seen this, right? This is very, very accurate. I was brought up in Cambridge for 6-7 years and in England, and There is what the British say, what the British mean, what the rest of the world understands. If the British say that's not bad, they mean that's bloody good. Most people think that that's quite poor, right? If the British say very interesting, what they mean is I don't agree, they are impressed. And this is funny, but at the same time, it's so, so true. And you even forget this because, like, you know, about 6 months ago, I was having a meeting with Sasha. And he's Russian. We're having a meeting. I'm on remote. After 1.5 hours, we finish it off, and he says, "Thank you, Hadi. That was very interesting." And there was like 6 people in the room. And I'm like, okay, fine. And I hang up, and then I call him privately. I'm like, "Sash, what?" He's like, "What do you mean what?" I'm like, what? You didn't like it? If there was something wrong, you could have told me in private. But he actually meant, no, it was really interesting. He didn't mean you're an idiot and you just wasted 1.5 hours of my time. And yet, I'm used to this, and I still forget about this. So when someone new joins, it's even more important to take this into account. How you speak to them, the way you say things. You know, we talk about sugarcoating stuff. Sugarcoating stuff actually does work. You don't say to someone, "Well, you see the way you've implemented that feature, that is absolute shit." The way you say it is, "Well, you know the way you've implemented that feature, that's pretty cool, but how about if we look at it from this aspect?" Now, we all know they're saying this is shit, but it feels so much better than someone saying this is shit, right? But culture is infused. You essentially lead by example. You want to keep your culture, you try and lead the way that things are being done. You don't moan up the corporate ladder. At Jetbrains, you generally don't do that because, as I said, you take 2 steps and you fall down. Like, I don't go to my manager and say, "Oh, this person's having an issue, go fix it." You try and fix it yourself. When I first joined Jetbrains, that's what I was doing, right? I was talking to Ilya, the guy that I was working most closely with, and I would, like, in a month, I'm like, "Oh, there's a problem there, there's a problem there, there's a problem there." And he's like, "And?" I'm like, "What do you mean, and?" "Well, we've got to fix it." He's like, "Well, you fix it." I'm like, "Well, I don't have the power to fix it." He's like, "Yes, you do." Yes, because it's part of that. At Jetbrains, you generally have the power to fix things, or you have the power to encourage others to fix things. You don't just sit back and say, "Well, that's a problem, let someone else handle it, it's not my fight." Because remember, care is a two-way street. If you care, you need to understand that you need to act on things that you see wrong. Because you care. You care for the people, you care for the company, you care for what you're doing. This is very important. It's not just it's someone else's problem. It's okay for it to be your problem as well. But, you know, we talk about culture, we always talk about protecting the culture, that we have to protect the culture, that we have to make sure that our culture doesn't change. The reality check is that culture does change. It evolves. Cultures change in society. Cultures change outside of society. When I first moved to Spain, bullfighting was a thing, right? Now, bullfighting is not a thing. Nobody really goes to bullfighting. Like, all of the bullfighting rings in my hometown, they're closed. Because cultures evolve. And the same way companies evolve. New people come, new ideas come, etc. But you need to find the line and the balance of what am I trying to protect, what am I trying to change. This is very sometimes hard to keep. We have documents, as I mentioned to you, on our black hole, which is like, how does the PMMs work? PMM is product marketing managers. How do developer advocates work? How do these work? How do that work? And someone joins and they're like, "Okay, so I'm a new marketing manager. What should I do?" "Go read that." And you're like, "Okay, I've read it." Right. I'm thinking about, no, that's not the way you do it at Jetbrains. That's not how we do it. No, you should be doing this. And this happens sometimes, but we need to understand that we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't disencourage people from trying new ideas. We have to keep our values. We have to make sure that it's in line with the strong values and the ethics that we believe in the company, but we have to allow them to expand and try different things. Because otherwise, companies don't evolve, people don't evolve, and sometimes that means that people will die. No, I mean the company, sorry, I don't mean people. You know what I'm saying, right? But in summary, if I were to kind of say to you, and what is like, for me, the best defines JetBrains, I would really honestly, and it's not a cliche, I would really honestly summarize it in trusting people, giving them the freedom to do their best, removing their obstacles, and more importantly, caring for them. Honestly and truly caring for them. And of course, you know, if you are the CEO, for instance, you can't care for 1,200 people. It's impossible. It's not viable. You can care for the people that are closer to you. But you lead by example. You care for those people that you care for the people that they work for, and so on and so forth. You lead by example, but you truly and honestly have to care for individuals, because that's when people feel that they can give their best back to you. Thank you. Am I staying on stage for questions, or are we done? We're done? Excellent, thank you. There's beers afterwards, so you can ask me any questions afterwards, right? Or you want, yeah, okay, good.